What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and with the NFL draft less than a week away, I'm going to continue going through my pre-draft dynasty rookie rankings. I went through my top 15 running backs yesterday. Today, we are locking in on the wide receiver position. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, comments, feel free to drop them down below. But starting off here with my wide receiver one in tier one, actually in a tier by himself, I am going to have Travis Hunter. I've kind of just accepted that I'm going to be higher than consensus when it comes to Travis Hunter. I really like his potential landing spot here. It seems like he's the shoo-in to go to the Browns. Now, I don't really like the landing spot from the perspective of like he's going to have great quarterback play. He's not going to have any target competition. With Travis Hunter, it's less about like, is he going to be a good NFL wide receiver? The question is more so like, is he going to be an NFL wide receiver at all? And when we look at this Browns landing spot, their GM Andrew Berry has said on multiple different occasions that they view Travis Hunter as a wide receiver first. Now, I still think he's going to play defense. He's made it clear that he wants to play both ways. But from a fantasy perspective, like we have to acknowledge this guy is a unicorn. But if they see him more as a wide receiver, I think from like a business perspective, wide receivers are getting paid way more. It makes sense for Travis Hunter to be a wide receiver first. And if he is a wide receiver first, I'm going to be in on him for fantasy. You know, obviously his first couple of seasons in college wasn't playing full-time wide receiver. Right when he gets that opportunity, he's playing both ways, but still putting together a monster wide receiver season. So talent-wise, he's my clear-cut wide receiver one. I do think the opportunity is going to be there. And when we're looking at this overall class, and for this specific video, the wide receiver position, I think he's the only guy at the wide receiver position that can really elevate his value into like a round one startup pick. Like, I like Ted McMillan, I like Emeka Egbuka, Luther Bird, and guys like this, but I can't really see them getting into like that Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Jefferson, Chase area, where we're talking about like top 10 or top 12 dynasty startup picks. I do think Travis Hunter has that upside. Not saying it's going to come to fruition, but I can at least see it. And I think, you know, he's worth as early as like the 102 in your rookie drafts. Now, moving into tier two, my number two wide receiver is going to be Ted McMillan. And I feel like he's kind of been hit with like some prospect fatigue over the last few weeks. I know there was the video going around about him saying like he doesn't like to watch film, he doesn't watch it, whatever. First off, I'm pretty sure that was from like his freshman year, so I'm not really dinging him a ton for that. I'm actually just like not dinging him at all for that statement. But when you watch the dude out on the field, he's a big physical wide receiver, great hands, has the play style of, you know, a T. Higgins, Drake London, Cortland Sutton, kind of like that archetype. He was a 3-year producer at Arizona, had back-to-back seasons with over 1,300 receiving yards. He's over a 2-to-1 favorite to be the first wide receiver off the board. Obviously, you know, excluding Travis Hunter in this conversation. So he really checks a lot of boxes. I do think there's some prospect fatigue here. I think he's a very solid option. And I think he's a nice, like mid, potentially like early round one rookie pick in your drafts. Then my other guy I have here in tier two is going to be Emeka Egbuka. I'm just extremely confident that Egbuka is going to be a solid fantasy wide receiver. He had 4 seasons at Ohio State, 3, you know, productive seasons, 2 seasons with over 1,000 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns. No one potentially ever has faced the level of target competition that Egbuka did in college. He overlapped with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Smith. Like, every year he was there, that Ohio State wide receiver room was absolutely insane. I think he's someone who can play out of the slot right away in the NFL. There seems to be some sort of like negative stigma when it comes to the slot. But I think when we're looking at fantasy production, especially some of the guys in these recent years, like we've seen Amon-Ra showcase really high ceiling playing, you know, nearly 50% of the snaps out of the slot. You had Ladd McConkey last year, I think was around 65%, putting together a great rookie season. JSN had a great year too. So I'm really not viewing it as a negative. I think he can be a target hog very early on. He's probably going to be a late round one, potential early round two draft pick, which I think is kind of this interesting sweet spot, especially just looking at how the draft could play out, because he's either going later round one to probably a very good team with a stable quarterback situation, or you look at that early second round area, and you've got a few of those teams that are probably going to be considering quarterback, like pick 33, pick 34, but you have the Jaguars there with an early round 2 pick, and I think that would be like the dream landing spot, stepping into like the Chris Godwin role in the Liam Cohen offense. You have BTJ there as the number 1, but I think both those guys could feast. So whether he goes late round 1, early round 2, I think there are a lot of fun landing spots for Emeka Egbuka. Now moving into tier 3, I'm going to start off this tier with Luther Burden as my wide receiver 4, and I think he's a very unique prospect. He has like the underneath screen usage of some of like these small kind of gimmicky wide receivers you see every so often, but he's not like that small Wan'Dale Robinson type of wide receiver. He's 6 foot tall, 206 pounds. I think DJ Moore is like the very realistic kind of like upside comp when you're looking at his play style. I think draft capital and landing spot are going to be very important for him, because if he's going round 1, which seems a little bit unlikely at this point, but like a team is really investing strong draft capital in him, you trust a winning team's coaching staff to use him effectively. If you're going round 2 to a tough situation, I do think he's someone who needs to be schemed up correctly. So you'd like to have some sort of confidence, with his potential landing spot and the coaching staff around him. And then the other guy I have here in tier 3 is going to be Matthew Golden. And at this point, it looks like he is going to be a potential top 20 pick in the first round. And I think of like all the recent drafts, he has one of, if not the weakest statistical profile from like a top 20 wide receiver pick. Now, like there are some bright spots in there, right? Like as a freshman, he was the wide receiver 2 at Houston, but very underwhelming sophomore season. Like he closed the 2024 season on a strong like last 6 games. But like ideally, if you're a round 1 wide receiver, like you're stamping a dominant junior season to get that draft capital. He kind of needed an Isaiah Bond injury to get that bump, and then like maxed out at 2.1 yards per route run. So I understand, he's a very good route runner, smart player. I know the film guys really like him, but like I'm probably just going to be lower on him than most top 20 wide receivers. The analytical profile is just not there. And so most top 20 wideouts are probably, locked into round 1 of rookie drafts. I don't expect him to be in my top 12, post NFL draft. Now moving into this next tier, I do think there's definitely a tier break from tier 3 to tier 4. You're looking at like the potential round 1, very early round 2 guys. This is more of the range of the players who are probably going to go pretty much anywhere on day 2. So my wide receiver 6 is going to be Jaden Higgins. I do think he's like my clear favorite in this next tier. He's a big wide receiver, 6'4", 214 pounds, tested very well athletically, ran a 4.47 40, jumped well, spent his first 2 seasons at Eastern Kentucky, and then had back-to-back big seasons once he transferred to Iowa State. Had a 3 yards per route run in 2023. 2024, 87 receptions, almost 1,200 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. I think there are some potential separation concerns. I have seen like the Keon Coleman comp. I think that came from Matt Harmon. So like there is some, risk there. Maybe he's more of a big slot, but I do think the fact that he's a much better athlete than Keon Coleman kind of helps him out. You also would potentially like a landing spot where there's some flexibility, where maybe he could play outside, but maybe you didn't have already like a locked in guy dominating the slot where he could potentially move there if that is a better situation for him. But I still like Jaden Higgins here. Hopefully he just gets a fun landing spot in round 2. Then my wide receiver 7 is going to be Jalen Knoll. Seems like he's getting a lot of hype right now. He was Higgins' teammate at Iowa State, played 65+% of his snaps from the slot in all 4 seasons. In 2023, we kind of saw like an interesting shift in his usage from 23 to 24. In 2023, he was like the typical slot guy, 7.7 ADOT, had nearly 7 yards after the catch per reception, which is a very solid number. Then in 2024, we saw him get used down the field much more, still out of the slot. So his ADOT rose from 7.7 to 12.2, and then, kind of makes sense, but his yak per reception decreased, went down from 6.9 to 4.2. He's not going to be a huge wide receiver, 5'10", 194, typical slot size. He tested very well, ran a 4.38 40, jumped well, and then also had very good times in the agility. So I think he's a guy where it's very easy to see him having success in the slot right away. Does he have the highest ceiling? Probably not, but I could definitely see him being like a solid wide receiver 2 at the next level. Continuing on with tier 4, I have Trey Harris as my number 8. Very different type of prospect than Jalen Knoll. He's pretty unique because he had very underwhelming early production in his college career, but then just put together an insane 2024, only played 8 games, but caught 60 receptions for 1,030 yards, 7 touchdowns, and then probably like the craziest yards per route run number I've seen, a 5.12 in that area, which is like really unheard of. He did run a pretty limited route tree at Ole Miss, didn't see a ton of underneath usage, very little outbreaking routes. And so like as an older prospect, 23 years old, it's possible that he's just going to be fairly limited as like deep threat. But it's also possible that like teams just don't utilize guys to their full potential. Like there were some concerns about Brian Thomas Jr. last year as like just being a deep threat. If he could win on all 3 levels, then you see him go to Jacksonville and all of a sudden he's like a monster with those underneath manufactured targets. I'm not saying he's Brian Thomas Jr. That is not the point I'm making here, but we just don't really know what these guys like full skill sets are. So we'll see what the draft capital looks like. The landing spot, not overly high on him, but I think this is a fair spot. And then a couple more guys in this tier. Wide receiver 9 is going to be Alec Iamaner. Production-wise, he's actually pretty impressive. Missed his freshman season with a torn ACL. And then right when he got on the field, 63 receptions for over 1,000 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. 2024, also 63 receptions, 831 yards, 6 touchdowns. Tested very well, 6'2", 206 pounds, run a 4.4, 440. He jumped well. If I'm being honest, I was kind of surprised he tested so well because I feel like that athleticism doesn't really jump off the screen when you're watching him. One potential red flag here is that 27% of his targets in those 2 seasons were contested. That's not ideal. That's, kind of a sign that if you're not separating in college, it's going to be tough to do that at the NFL level. And what's also not great is that he caught under 50% of his contested targets in both seasons. So if you are going to have a lot of contested targets, ideally you're at least coming away with those plays. If you're under 50% in back-to-back years, that's tough. He's probably a day 2 pick. I think a landing spot will be interesting. Does he play out wide? Is he a big slot? We'll just have to wait and see. And then the final wide receiver I have in tier 4 is going to be Jalen Royals out of Utah State. So he had 0 production in his first 2 collegiate seasons. 2023 breaks out, 70 receptions for 1,084 yards and 15 touchdowns. In 2024, only played in 7 games, but caught 55 passes for 834 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's very good after the catch, 7.9 yards after the catch per reception. That was from this past season. He's very good at tracking the ball down the field. Not someone who's going to command a ton of contested targets, but at a 64.1% career contested catch rate, which is, pretty awesome. And then another guy who's probably going to be picked somewhere on day 2. Now moving into tier 5, going to start off with Isaiah Bond. Kind of an interesting college career, didn't do much his freshman season, was Alabama's wide receiver 2 behind Jermaine Burton as a sophomore. Then he transfers to Texas for his junior season. Had a really strong start to the season before he had his ankle injury, and I think it was the 6th game of the season. So the first 5 games, he was operating as the number 1, 20 receptions, 364 yards, 3 touchdowns, also had a couple carries for 51 yards and a touchdown. In that same stretch, the first 5 games of the season, Matthew Golden was only at 18 receptions for 223 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was in and out of the lineup with that ankle injury for the rest of the season, and in his last 9 games, only caught 14 passes for 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's very explosive after the catch. You can kind of move him around, play out wide, play in the slot, so you can use him creatively. He does have some legal stuff going on right now that could potentially affect his draft stock, but I do think it'd be interesting, if he stayed healthy, how the perception would be different between him and Matthew Golden. I also think they tested kind of far apart in terms of their 40 times. If you watch these 2 guys play, I think you would think Bond was the much faster guy. He seems like he just has that burst when he gets in the open field. So probably another one of these guys that's just going to be in the day 2 bucket. We'll see about draft capital and landing spot. And then the other guy I have in this tier is going to be Jack Besh out of TCU. Very interesting production profile. He walked into LSU as a true freshman and outproduced Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Trey Palmer, NFL caliber wide receivers. Neighbors and BTJ look like, they're potential top 5 guys moving forward. Then he got buried on the depth chart in year 2. He transferred to TCU, where he was, once again, pretty much a non-factor in 2023. And then he breaks out this past year, gets over 1,000 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. He's just a very solid player, great hands, only a 2.9% career drop rate. He's great in contested catch situations, 61.8% catch rate. He's physical after the catch. He's not going to be some sort of elite athlete, but I think he is someone who could come in, have a solid role on an NFL team. And then my final tier here, tier 6, we're going to start it off with Torrey Horton out of Colorado State. I think he's kind of a fun sleeper at the wide receiver position. Played his first 2 seasons at Nevada, transfers to Colorado State, and has back-to-back 1,000-plus yard seasons with 8 touchdowns. Now, I think one potential red flag here is like if you're Torrey Horton and you transfer, you have the big junior year, you don't go for the NFL draft, then you play the senior year, have another big season. Like, it's not great that he wasn't getting good feedback about heading to the NFL, right? Because, like, back-to-back, like, having those big seasons, you think he would have, some hype from the NFL. So he goes back for year 5, plays 6 games before suffering a season-ending knee injury. So he rehabs from that injury, comes into the combine, tests very well. Like, he's 6'2.5", 196 pounds, ran a 4.48 40, had a solid vertical. He's reliable hands. He's effective in contested catch situations. You're just kind of hoping he gets that day 2 capital and a fun spot. And then we have Kyle Williams here out of Washington State. Really fun prospect to watch. Seems to be getting a lot of hype recently. Spent his first 3 seasons at UNLV, his last 2 at Washington State. Was someone who was, fairly productive early on in his collegiate career. Like, as a true freshman, I believe he was getting over like 400 receiving yards in that season, but he just never like stamped a big time season until this past year in 2024. 70 receptions, nearly 1,200 receiving yards, 14 touchdowns through the air, 2.71 yards per out run, 8.4 yards after the catch per reception, over a 50% career contested catch rate. He's so dangerous with the ball in his hands. Great burst. You're just hoping for day 2 draft capital and then a team that's going to use him effectively, because when he does get the ball, the dude's extremely exciting to watch. And then the last guy I have here in my top 15, going to go with Savion Williams out of TCU. He is a very unique prospect and I think is extremely landing spot dependent, because he's not someone that you're just going to be able to like throw out there and have him win on the outside. He's not going to find success in that way. He was a former high school quarterback, transitioned to wide receiver while he was in college, and so he's very raw as a route runner. He's not polished in that area, and he's like a 23-year-old prospect. So I'm not sure how much improvement he's actually going to make in that area. He also had a pretty bad drop rate, above 10%, over his career. But you look at his last 3 seasons, 17% of his targets were contested, which is a good number. You don't want that to be super high, but he had a 79% contested catch rate. That is absolutely insane. Like, he's turning 50-50 balls into 80-20s. He was used as a wildcat quarterback at TCU. In 2024, he had 51 carries, 322 rushing yards, and 6 rushing touchdowns. It seems like every year you have a few prospects that are getting compared to Deebo Samuel. I know Luther Burden gets that this year, and I think that's actually a decent comp. But like, Savion Williams is the guy that you want in that Deebo role. If he somehow ended up with the 49ers, like, you could see the clear path to him being used effectively, getting carries, getting used underneath, just getting the ball in his hands. He's a great athlete. So if he's going to an interesting landing spot, I think he's fun. If a team's just expecting him to come in and be able to win right away, probably not going to go great for him. So that's going to wrap it up for my top 15. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Check out my top 15 running backs I posted yesterday. I'll be going through my top 36 overall players tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.